The minister called her the most beloved woman in Genesee County. He said it from the pulpit of the First Presbyterian Church in Batavia on a Wednesday afternoon in October of 1911, while I stood in the front pew in my black dress with my hands folded and my face performing the appropriate grief, and 200 people behind me wept for my sister Philippa as though the sun itself had been extinguished and the world would now have to learn to navigate by some lesser light. He was not wrong. She was beloved. She was the most beloved person I have ever known, and I have known a great many people in 89 years, and none of them were beloved the way Pippa was beloved, which is to say automatically, without effort, without campaign or strategy, the way a fire is warm without trying to be warm. People loved Pippa the way they loved weather they had been hoping for. She arrived, and the room improved, and nobody questioned it, and nobody analyzed it, and certainly nobody resented it except me, who resented it for 73 years and who is still resenting it 16 years after they put her in the ground, with the word beloved carved into the stone, which was accurate and which I could not contest, and which I paid for because I was the one who handled the money, because I was always the one who handled the money, because Pippa did not handle money, Pippa handled people, and the people loved her for it, and the money was my department. I am going to tell you what it was like to stand next to that light for 73 years and never cast a shadow of your own, because her shadow was the only one the world was interested in looking at. I am going to tell it as a ledger because a ledger is what it was, an accounting of things taken, not by force, not by cruelty, not even by intention, but taken nonetheless, one entry at a time across 7 decades until the account was so imbalanced that the only thing left on my side was the ability to keep the books, which I did. I kept excellent books. Nobody thanked me for that either. My name is Parthenia Dorcas Beale, born Parthenia Dorcas Grover, on the 19th of May, 1838, in Genesee County, New York. People called me Thena because Parthenia is a name that sounds impressive on paper and ridiculous in a kitchen, which is where I spent most of my life. I was born on my father's farm, 200 acres of the flattest, richest land in western New York, wheat country, good soil, the kind of land that produced not just crops but respectability, because in Genesee County your land was your character, and our land was excellent, and therefore so were we. My father was Clarence Grover, wheat farmer, church deacon, county fair committee member, a man who occupied the exact center of Genesee County respectability without ever deviating from it in either direction. My mother was Harriet Grover, born Harriet Pemberton, a capable woman who managed the household with the same efficiency my father applied to the farm, which is to say everything worked and nothing was remarkable, and the machinery of the family operated so smoothly that you forgot there was machinery at all. I was the first child, born 1838. I was a serious baby, according to my mother, who told me this as though it were a diagnosis rather than a description. Serious. I did not cry excessively. I slept when I was supposed to sleep. I ate when I was supposed to eat. I achieved the developmental milestones in the order they were expected and at the times they were anticipated. I was, in summary, a satisfactory child, not remarkable, not difficult, satisfactory. Pippa was born 2 years later in 1840, and the word satisfactory was never used in connection with her because satisfactory is a word for things that meet expectations, and Pippa exceeded expectations from the moment she emerged. She smiled. That was the first thing. She smiled earlier than babies typically smile, or so my mother claimed, though I suspect the early smiling was a retrospective enhancement, the kind of revision that memory performs when the subject warrants it. She smiled and people smiled back, and the transaction was established that would govern the rest of her life and mine. Pippa produced warmth. The world returned it. I produced competence. The world noted it in the ledger and moved on. Entry the first, the parents. My mother loved me. I do not dispute this. She fed me and clothed me and corrected me and taught me to sew and to cook and to manage a household with the relentless competence that was her particular gift and that she passed to me like a trade passed from master to apprentice. She loved me the way you love a tool that performs reliably, with respect, with appreciation, with the confidence that it will be there when you need it. She did not love me the way she loved Pippa. Pippa she loved with delight. That is the word. The difference between my mother's love for me and her love for Pippa was the difference between appreciation and delight. My mother appreciated me. My mother was delighted by Pippa. When I entered a room, my mother's face registered acknowledgement. When Pippa entered a room, my mother's face lit up, literally changed its configuration, the muscles around the eyes and mouth rearranging themselves into an expression of pleasure that was involuntary and obvious, and that I observed thousands of times over the course of my childhood without ever once producing it myself. My father was similar, though he expressed it differently. My father was proud of me. Thena is reliable, he would say. Thena can be counted on. These are the compliments you give to a fence post. Reliable, can be counted on, serves its purpose, does not fall down. My father was proud of me the way he was proud of his straight furrows and his well-maintained equipment. Functional pride, useful pride. Pippa made him laugh. That was the distinction. I could make my father nod with satisfaction. Pippa could make him laugh, a sound so rare from Clarence Grover that when it occurred it changed the atmosphere of the house the way a window opening changes the air. She made him laugh, and he looked at her with an expression I have spent 89 years trying to name, and the closest I can come is wonder. He wondered at her. He did not wonder at me. You do not wonder at a fence post. Entry the second. The community. Genesee County in the 1850s was a world organized around social gatherings, church socials, county fairs, quilting circles, harvest suppers, lyceum lectures in the winter. These events were the fabric of community life, and participation in them was both expected and observed. Your standing in the community was determined not only by your land and your family name, but by your presence at these events and the quality of that presence. I was present at every event. I arrived early, I organized, I set up tables and arranged food and made sure the minister had a chair and the musicians had their platform and the children had something to keep them occupied. I baked. Lord, I baked. Pies, cakes, bread, biscuits, the entire repertoire of Genesee County baking produced from my mother's kitchen and carried to every social, every fair, every supper for 20 years. My pies won at the county fair 3 times. 3 blue ribbons. I was proud of those ribbons. I was the best baker in the township, and everyone knew it. Pippa arrived late. Not dramatically late, not rudely late, just late enough that people noticed when she arrived the way people notice when the temperature rises a degree or two, not because the change is dramatic, but because something in the environment has shifted, and everyone feels it. She walked in, and people turned toward her, and conversation became livelier, and laughter became easier, and the event which had been proceeding competently under my management suddenly became enjoyable under her presence. I set up the room. She filled it. I made the pies. She made the evening. I received 3 blue ribbons. She received something I could not win at a fair and could not bake in an oven and could not earn through any amount of competence, which was the attention of everyone in the room, delivered freely, without solicitation, as a natural response to a person who generated warmth the way the sun generates light, automatically, without effort, without the possibility of reduction. I am making her sound calculated. She was not calculated. This is the cruelty of it. If Pippa had been calculating, if she had deliberately positioned herself at the center of every gathering, if she had consciously charmed every person she met with strategic intent, I could have named her a manipulator and dismissed her and moved on. She was not a manipulator. She was genuinely, authentically, effortlessly warm. She cared about people. She remembered their names, their children's names, their difficulties, and their triumphs. She asked questions and listened to the answers with an attention that made the speaker feel important. She was kind, she was generous, she was everything a good person should be, and she was all of it without trying, and I could not compete because you cannot compete with nature. You cannot outwork the sun. Entry the third. Edmund Hollis. This is the one I have rehearsed most carefully and can speak about least calmly, so I will say it quickly and let the saying be sufficient. Edmund Hollis was the son of Jacob Hollis, whose farm adjoined ours to the north. He was born in 1836, 2 years before me. He had light brown hair and steady eyes and hands that were careful with things and a way of listening when you spoke that made you believe he was interested in what you were saying, which he was, except that I was not the person he was interested in hearing it from. I loved him from the time I was 16 years old. Not the abstract love of a girl who loves the idea of a man, specific love. Love of the way he held the reins of his horse, loosely, with confidence. Love of the way he tipped his hat to my mother when he came to call. Love of the sound of his voice discussing wheat prices with my father, a sound so ordinary that it should not have produced the response it produced in me, but did every time, a quickening, a warmth, a certainty that this was the man I would marry and the life I would build. He came to our house weekly, Sunday afternoons. He sat in the parlor and drank the tea I made and ate the cake I baked and talked with my father and was polite to my mother. And I believed, with the unshakable conviction of a girl who wants something badly enough to see evidence of it everywhere, that he came for me. He came for Pippa. I learned this when I was 21, standing behind the partially open door of the barn, where I had gone to fetch something. I do not remember what. The thing I went to fetch has been erased by the thing I heard. Edmund was talking to his brother Walter. He said, and I remember the exact words because they burned into my memory with the permanence of a brand on livestock, I intend to ask for Philippa's hand. She is the finest girl in the county. I believe she will have me. She is the finest girl in the county. 5 years of Sunday afternoon visits. 5 years of tea I brewed and cake I baked and conversation I participated in and futures I imagined. 5 years. And he had been looking over my shoulder the entire time, looking at Pippa, who was 2 years younger and infinitely more luminous, and who had not brewed 1 cup of tea for him because that was not what Pippa did. Pippa did not brew tea. Pippa was the reason you came for tea. Before we continue, a quick word. I released 14 full recordings that will never be on YouTube. These are the voices too personal, too raw to share publicly, completely unedited, nothing cut. If you want access, the link is in the description. It's called The Lost Recordings, and getting it helps us keep making these videos. All right, back to the story. Edmund married Pippa in June of 1862. I was a bridesmaid. I stood beside my sister in the First Presbyterian Church in Batavia, and I held her flowers while she spoke her vows, and I smiled because smiling was expected, and I did not cry because crying was not expected. And I went home afterward, and I sat in my room, and I did something I have never told anyone, which is that I opened the drawer where I had been keeping things for the household I believed I would build with Edmund. Small things I had been collecting since I was 17, a tablecloth I had embroidered, a set of napkins, a recipe book I had begun compiling in my best handwriting, and I closed the drawer, and I did not open it again for 20 years, and when I did open it, the moth had gotten into the tablecloth, and the fabric fell apart in my hands, and that seemed about right. Entry the fourth, the family home. My father died in 1870. He was 62. Heart failure, the physician said, which meant his heart stopped, and nobody knew why. The will was straightforward. The farm, 200 acres, the barns, the equipment, the house went to Pippa and Edmund. Pippa, who had married and moved to Edmund's adjacent farm, and who had 3 children by then, and who had not worked a day on our family farm since her marriage. The farm went to Pippa because Pippa was the center, and the center received the inheritance, and the perimeter received a sum of cash, $400, which was not insignificant, but which was not 200 acres and a house, and the only home I had ever known. I could have contested. I did not, because contesting would have required me to stand in a courtroom and argue that I deserved the farm more than Pippa, and the argument would have been true and nobody would have believed it because everybody loved Pippa, and I was the fence post, and fence posts do not inherit farms. Fence posts stand at the edge of the property and do their job and do not complain. I took the $400. I did not complain. I added it to the ledger. Entry the 5th. The husband I got. I married Orson Beale in September of 1865. I was 27, which in Genesee County in 1865 was perilously close to the age at which an unmarried woman became an object of the specific sympathy reserved for women who had not been chosen, a sympathy that was worse than hostility because it was disguised as kindness and could not be refused. Orson was a miller. He operated a grist mill on the Tonawanda Creek, grinding wheat and corn for the surrounding farms. He was decent, he was honest, he was physically strong from the mill work and mentally steady from the disposition God had given him, and he was not Edmund Hollis. He was not the man I wanted. He was the man who was available after the man I wanted was taken by the same force that took everything, which was Pippa's gravity, though Orson did not know this, and I did not tell him, and our marriage was built on the foundation of his not knowing and my not telling, and the foundation held for 44 years, which is longer than many foundations built on truth. I want to be fair to Orson. He deserves fairness, and I have not always been fair in my mind, even if I was fair in my actions. He was a good husband. He provided. He was faithful. He treated me with a respect that was genuine, if not passionate. He did not make my face light up the way Edmund made Pippa's face light up, but he did not make it darken either, and perhaps a face that remains level is its own kind of achievement. We had 2 children, Samuel, born 1867, Martha, born 1870. They grew up in the mill house, and they were fed and clothed and educated and loved in the level way, the fence post way, the way I loved and was loved, reliably, competently, without delight. Entry the 6th, even at the end. My mother died in 1898. She was 82. She had been declining for 2 years, and I had been managing her care because I was the one who managed things, and because Pippa, though she visited frequently and brought flowers and held Mother's hand and made Mother's face do that thing it did that lighting up Pippa did not manage. Managing was not her gift. Warming was her gift. She warmed the room and I cleaned it, and between us my mother's final years were both warm and clean, and everyone credited Pippa for the warmth, and nobody credited me for the clean, and I added it to the ledger. On the last night, my mother was in her bed in the room at the back of Pippa's house, the family house, the house that had been my home and was now Pippa's. I had been with her all day, changed the linens, administered the medicine the physician had left, cooled her forehead with damp cloths, fed her broth, done everything that needed doing with the competence I had been trained to produce and had produced without interruption for 60 years. At 9 o'clock, my mother opened her eyes. She was lucid, which she had not been for several days. She looked around the room. She saw me. She said, "Where is Philippa?" Not "Where is Thena?" Not "Thank you, Thena, for the linens and the broth and the 14 hours of care." "Where is Philippa?" I sent for Pippa. Pippa came. Pippa sat on the bed and took our mother's hand, and our mother's face did the thing, and our mother smiled and closed her eyes and died holding Pippa's hand. I was in the kitchen, making tea that nobody would drink because the person who might have drunk it was dead, and the person who had made it was standing at the stove with a kettle in her hand and an entry in her ledger, and 60 years of competence that had not been sufficient to make her mother ask for her at the end. the complication. I must state it now because without it this account is merely the complaint of a jealous woman, and it is not that, or it is not only that, and the distinction matters. Pippa loved me. She loved me genuinely, consistently, without reservation. She was the most loving sister a person could have. She shared what she had. When the farm became hers, she invited me to every holiday dinner, every family gathering, every occasion that the house could hold. She named her first daughter Parthenia after me, which was either a tribute or an irony so refined that only God could have designed it. She came to my house when I was sick. She brought food when Orson's mill had a bad season. She held my children when they were babies and told me I was a wonderful mother, and she meant it. She meant everything she said because Pippa did not say things she did not mean. That was another of her gifts, sincerity, complete, devastating sincerity. She did not know she was taking things from me. I am as certain of this as I am of anything. She did not know that Edmund had been coming for her instead of me. She did not know that our parents' preference for her was visible and painful. She did not know that the farm, the community's attention, the warmth that followed her everywhere like a loyal dog, she did not know these were things I wanted and did not have. She did not know because she was not looking. Not because she was self-absorbed, but because the things she had came so naturally to her that she could not imagine anyone lacking them. She assumed everyone was loved the way she was loved because she could not conceive of a world in which love was distributed unequally. This was either innocence or obliviousness, and I have never determined which, and the distinction may not matter because the result was the same. How do you resent a person who loves you? How do you hold a grudge against someone whose only crime is being more lovable than you are? How do you maintain a ledger of losses against a woman who does not know she is taking anything because the things she takes are given to her freely by a world that prefers her to you? These questions have occupied me for 73 years, and I have answers for none of them. The resentment is real. The love is real. They coexist in me the way tenants coexist in a house with thin walls, each aware of the other, each unable to evict the other, each making the other's existence more uncomfortable by their proximity. Pippa died in October of 1911, cancer of the stomach. She was 71. The decline was swift, which was a mercy I recognized as a mercy even while I was compiling another entry in the ledger, which was that even in dying, Pippa was more graceful than I would be. She died beautifully. People said so. She died with her family around her and her face peaceful and her hand in Edmund's hand. Poor Edmund, who would follow her within the year, unable apparently to sustain a life that did not contain her, which was the final confirmation of what I had known since I was 21 years old in the barn, listening to him tell his brother that she was the finest girl in the county. The funeral, I have told you about the funeral. The minister and the eulogy and the 200 people and the word beloved. I stood in the front pew and I felt what I felt, which was grief and something else, something that had no name and that I have spent 16 years trying to name. It was not relief. I want to be clear about this because relief at a sister's death would make me the monster. The ledger sometimes suggests I am, and I am not a monster. I am a woman who was overshadowed and who kept the books. Relief is what you feel when a burden is lifted. What I felt was not the lifting of a burden. It was more like the cessation of a sound, a hum, a constant low hum that had been present in my life for 73 years, the hum of comparison, of measurement, of falling short. The hum stopped when Pippa died, not because I had wanted it to stop through her death, but because her death was the only thing that could stop it, since the hum was not generated by me. It was generated by the world's response to her. And when she was gone, the world stopped responding, and the hum ceased, and the silence that replaced it was disorienting. For the first time in 73 years, I was not standing next to someone brighter. I was not the shadow. I was not the competent one, the reliable one, the one who baked the pies and set up the tables and handled the money. I was just Thena, just a woman, just a person standing alone in a room without a comparison point. And I did not know what to do with that because I had been a comparison point for so long that the comparing had become my identity. Without Pippa to fall short of, who was I? The question should have been liberating. It was terrifying. Orson had died in 1909, 2 years before Pippa. I was alone. I have been alone for 18 years now. My children visit. Samuel runs a dairy farm in Leroy. Martha married a lawyer in Rochester and lives in a house with electric lights and an indoor lavatory, which she describes to me with the same enthusiasm Pippa once applied to describing a church social. I am 89 years old. I live in the mill house where Orson and I spent our marriage. It is quiet here. The mill has not operated since Orson's death. The wheel is still, the stones are dusty, and the silence is the silence of a place that used to make something useful and no longer does, which is how I think about myself most days. I go to Pippa's grave once a month, not weekly. Weekly would suggest a devotion I am not prepared to perform. Monthly suggests an obligation I am willing to fulfill, which is what it is. An obligation, though to whom the obligation is owed, I could not say. To Pippa, to our mother, to the family, to the 73 years of ledger entries that require, if not resolution, at least acknowledgement. I stand at the stone. Philippa Grover Hollis, 1840-1911, beloved. I look at the word and I cannot argue with it. She was beloved by everyone who knew her, by the community, by our parents, by Edmund, by her children, by God, presumably, if God plays favorites, which the evidence suggests he does. I talk to her. I say things I could not say while she was alive because saying them would have required me to admit what I felt, and admitting what I felt would have disrupted the arrangement being that Pippa was the light and I was the person who paid the electric bill. I say, I miss you, Pippa. I have missed you my whole life. When you were alive, I missed you because you were right there and I could not reach you. You were 3 feet away at every dinner table, every church social, every family gathering, and the 3 feet might as well have been 300 miles because you were on the inside of something I was on the outside of, and the door was not locked, but I could not find the handle. Now you are gone, and I miss you because the reaching is over and my arms are still out, and there is nothing to reach for, and the emptiness of that is worse than the failure of reaching. I say, I am sorry I kept the ledger. I am sorry I counted every loss and filed every slight and maintained an account of damages against a woman who did not know she was causing any. The ledger was not fair. You did not deserve it. You loved me, and the loving was genuine, and I received it with one hand while writing entries against you with the other, and that is not a thing I am proud of. I say, but the losses were real, Pippa. The losses were real even if you did not cause them deliberately. Edmund was real. The farm was real. Mother asking for you at the end was real. 73 years of being the invisible one was real. You cannot tell me these things did not happen simply because you did not intend them. A tree does not intend to shade the ground beneath it, but the ground is shaded nonetheless, and nothing grows there, and the ground has a right to notice. They put beloved on your stone. They were right. You were beloved by everyone, including me, especially me. That was the problem, Pippa. I loved you too. And loving you was the loneliest thing I ever did, because loving someone everyone loves means your love is never singular, never special, never the one that matters most. It is just one more voice in the chorus that followed you everywhere you went. I loved you. And my love was indistinguishable from everyone else's, and I wanted it to be distinguishable, and it never was. And I have carried that for 73 years and 16 more years beyond that. And I am 89, and I am tired of carrying it, and I am putting it down here beside your stone where it belongs, with you, with everything else that was yours, which was everything, which was always everything, while I stood beside you with my empty hands and my blue ribbons and my ledger and my love that was never enough, because nothing was ever enough when the person it was aimed at already had more than she could hold. Loving you was the loneliest thing I ever did, and I did it for 73 years, and I am doing it still.